First up, Leader of the SNP, Nicola Sturgeon.
On June the 8th, you will elect MPs to represent Scotland at Westminster. You can choose MPs who will do what Theresa May wants, or SNP MPs who will stand up for Scotland. In the years ahead, it will be vital to have strong voices for Scotland at Westminster. MPs who will keep a Tory government in check. A Tory government that we know from long experience will not have Scotland's best interests at heart. A vote for the SNP will back our plan to end the Tory cuts that are holding our economy back, damaging our public services and pushing more people into poverty. A vote for the SNP will strengthen Scotland's hand against an extreme Brexit. And a vote for the SNP will protect Scotland's right to make our own decisions. Now, more than ever, it is vital to have strong SNP voices standing up for Scotland.
Doug Dare, Leader of the Scottish Labour Party.
I voted to remain in the European Union, and I voted against independence, like hundreds of thousands of you. But what we've got is hard Brexit and the SNP hell-bent on a second independence referendum. You're worried about your job, about your family's finances, their future and the rising cost of living. I want a Labour government, but if the polls are right, the Tories will be back and they'll be more destructive than ever before. So who do you want to stand up to the Tories? Labour MPs who understand your life because they've lived it? Or SNP MPs who will use every bit of Tory cruelty to exploit the case for independence? You can reject the Tories and a second independence referendum by voting Labour on the 8th of June.
Davidson.
Thank you. This election offers a massive opportunity for Scotland. It gives us the chance to move on from the divisions of the past and to face the challenges ahead together, improving Scotland's schools, boosting our economy and getting the best deal possible as we leave the European Union. And I say we can meet those challenges, but we can't do it if we're divided. Now, Nicola Sturgeon said she's putting independence at the heart of her campaign. I say enough. Fix our schools, don't split up our country. Champion our business, don't put a border at Berwick. At this election, we can send the SNP a message that they can't ignore. And with your help, we can stop them. And in so doing, we can get back to the issues that really matter.
Lee Rennie to give his opening statement.
This is a chance to change the direction of the country, to build a brighter future, to turn away from another divisive independence referendum and a damaging hard Brexit. Instead, with a modest penny on tax, we can invest in our people, to get Scottish education back to the best in the world again, so that people can have the skills to drive our economy, to get people the mental health treatment that they need so that they can contribute too. In so many seats across the country, it is a straight choice between the Liberal Democrats and the SNP. We can win those seats. We can change the direction of the country. We can have that brighter future.
David Coburn.
UKIP is the party of Brexit. We must elect UKIP to the Commons to ensure Brexit means exit. UKIP wants to expand the economy by creating new and exciting free trade agreements with growing economies around the world. This is only possible if we are out of the EU single market. Only UKIP is trusted to get us out of the EU and bring the powers home here to Scotland and England. Tories, SNP, Labour, Liberal, Democrats and the Greens all Remainers and all got it wrong. UKIP wants sovereignty over British laws to be in British hands. UKIP is the party of the British Union. We are completely opposed to a second Scottish independence referendum. Taxes in Scotland should be no higher than the rest of the UK. If possible, make them lower. We must be able to compete. Scotland has decided. We voted to remain British, and British will remain.
Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Sarah. Scotland needs a green voice at Westminster. We've achieved a huge number of social and environmental protections in Europe. Those will be in the hands of a hard-right Tory government, hell-bent on a bonfire of the regulations. That will literally put people's lives on the line. We also need to oppose their cuts agenda. It's destroying people's lives, but it's also a failure to invest in the sustainable future our economy needs. All these other parties have voted for subsidies and tax breaks to the big polluters. We need to be investing, and Greens have a plan to invest in generating over 200,000 new jobs in the sustainable economy. Finally, we need a social security system worthy of the name, based on a universal basic income. That will enable everyone to live with dignity, free from the fear of poverty. Everyone has a right to that decent future, and Greens will stand up for that if you put the first Green voice for Scotland into Westminster.
Nicola Sturgeon, you're warning of an extreme Brexit. Now, you know 1 million Scots voted to leave the European Union. You talk about trying to stay in the EU single market. Should people who voted for Brexit not vote SNP at this election?
I think whether people voted leave or remain last year at the EU referendum, in this election they should vote SNP for the reason that it will strengthen Scotland's hand in these Brexit negotiations, because we know that the Tories are now no longer just pursuing Brexit. They're in hock to UKIP, so they're now pursuing the most extreme form of Brexit. And we also know that that will put tens of thousands of Scottish jobs on the line. It will lower Scottish living standards. It will make it harder for our produce and our exports to get to market. So however you voted last year, if you want to make sure that Scotland's voice can't be ignored in these negotiations, then strengthen the Scottish hand so that we can make sure Scottish interests are absolutely at the heart of the talks over the next few months.
But how does a vote for the SNP do that? Because Theresa May has already dismissed your plan for keeping Scotland in the single market and said that there is no seat at the negotiating table for you. So how will the SNP change the Brexit negotiations?
This election gives us the opportunity to send a message to Theresa May that says Scotland will not be ignored in these talks. As you rightly say, we put forward compromise proposals, proposals that would have accepted that Scotland with the rest of the UK was leaving the EU, but that would have kept us in the single market. And staying within the single market is so important to jobs and to investment and to living standards in Scotland. That's why the week after the referendum, Ruth Davidson in the Scottish Parliament challenged me to do everything I could to protect her place in the single market. Unfortunately, she now no longer supports her place in the single market. So my message, however people voted last year in the referendum, is strengthen my hand to make sure Scotland's voice is heard, and the proposals to protect Scottish jobs are at the centre of these negotiations. Let's not allow jobs and our economy to be sacrificed on the altar of a Tory party trying to curry favour with UKIP voters.
Ruth Davidson, you were a passionate Remainer campaigning in the EU referendum, and immediately after the referendum result, you did say you wanted the UK to stay in the EU single market. Have you changed your mind about that?
The reason for that is because I want Scottish businesses to be able to trade freely abroad. Now, we've heard the Prime Minister's plan for how she's going to conduct the Brexit negotiations, and that includes a free trade deal with the other 27. Now, we can quibble about the framework, but as long as Scottish businesses get access and free access to that, then I'm on board with that. But I can't honestly believe what I'm hearing from my right-hand side here, because Nicola Sturgeon, the very morning the Brexit result was announced, said that she had already instructed civil servants in Scotland to draw up the necessary legislation for an independence referendum. She says if you voted for or against Remain or Leave, you can vote SNP. Well, all I've seen in the year since the Brexit vote is her ignoring the votes of Leavers and taking Remain votes as a proxy for independence, and it's not good enough. This is a serious issue, and we need serious people around the table. There will only be two people leading this negotiation. It's either going to be Theresa May or it's going to be Jeremy Corbyn.
Last July, Ruth Davidson said in an interview, I think on the BBC, when she was asked who should take part in these negotiations, she said Scotland's voice should be represented by the Scottish Government. The First Minister should play her full part. It seems to me that Ruth Davidson started out opposing Brexit, but then saying we should stay in the single market. Now she opposes staying in the single market. She used to say we should have a seat at the negotiating table, and now she's changed her mind. It seems to me Ruth Davidson does everything Theresa May tells her to do, which is why we need strong SNP voices at Westminster.
All right, well, let Ruth Davidson come back in on that.
Says she wants a seat at the Brexit table, but she wants Scotland to be out of the UK and into the Europe. So I ask myself, which side of the table does she want to be sat on? And when it comes to withholding and talking about what we want to achieve here, the issue, this compromise agreement that she said she wanted to put on the table, would have ended the UK internal market. No, that's why it was rejected. You can't have half of a state in the EU single market and the other half
This is from
out.
the same party.
And the internal market is worth 4 times more in terms of trade and 5 times more in terms of
Now, you're all well aware that if you all talk over each other, nobody here or at home can hear you. We've heard from you, First Minister. Okay. Let's go to Kezia Dugdale and ask you, you're campaigning for Jeremy Corbyn to be elected Prime Minister in less than 3 weeks' time. Do you think if it was him in Brussels negotiating our Brexit deal, he would do a better job than Theresa May?
Well, I want a Labour government and a Labour Prime Minister because that's how we protect jobs and the economy. But I can't let these two get away with what they're saying about Brexit. The reality for the First Minister is Brexit is just the excuse she was looking for to have a second independence referendum. And immediately after the European Union referendum, she told us if we had a referendum, Scotland would get to stay in the European Union. Now she tells us that we might have to reapply or she might settle for the Norwegian option. She doesn't tell the truth about this. She's all over the place. Whatever gets her to independence is the one thing she'll go for in the end of the day.
So let's at this point take some contributions from the audience. Is there anybody here who would like to interject? So there's a gentleman in a check shirt just up here.
Just wish that Ruth would learn to differentiate between access to the single market and being part of the single market. North Korea has access to the single market. It's not the same thing.
And there's a gentleman in a grey jacket just here. A microphone will be with you in a moment, and we'll take a point from this gentleman here. Just here in the third row. Yes.
The only national party, in my opinion, that can take on the Tories against our Brexit is, in fact, the Labour Party. Because the Scottish, no matter how many seats the Scottish Nationalists get in Scotland, there'll still be a small party in Westminster. And the only party that can take on the Tories, therefore, is the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn.
And let's take one more contribution from the back row. There's a gentleman in a shirt and tie in the back row.
Scotland clearly voted to stay within Europe. However, there wasn't that much information going around that we really could debate because a lot of people just had a one-sided argument. Now that the vote's been completed, I think even England would probably vote to go the other way if they had the opportunity. Do you think they should have the opportunity before the end?
Well, that leads us very neatly on to the leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Willie Rennie, because it is your policy to have another referendum. But there are a lot of people, even people who voted Remain, who say that looks like being sore losers. You can't have a referendum once, you don't like the results, so you just do it again.
I mean, what we are saying is that because it's such a monumental decision, that the British people should have the final say on whatever deal is agreed between the government and the European Union. Because this could have quite a dramatic impact on our security, on jobs, on the environment, even on funding for the NHS. So it would only be reasonable for the British people to decide, rather than a small number of Conservatives accepting whether it's a deal that's good enough for the United Kingdom. I think the British people should have the option to reject a bad deal. I think that's reasonable. We started this process in a democratic way. We should finish it in a democratic way.
David Coburn for UKIP. You said in your opening statement it was important to elect UKIP MPs, or maybe even one UKIP MP, to make sure that Brexit happens the way you like. What do you not like about Theresa May's plans as we currently understand them for Brexit?
Well, let's be frank, Theresa May and Ruth Davidson were both Remainers, and the entire Tory party wanted to remain within the European Union. UKIP need to be there to make sure that that happens. And only if you've got UKIP there can you be sure that that will happen.
But in everything you've heard the Prime Minister say since the EU referendum, and where she's laid out the terms for the Brexit negotiations, including leaving the single market, ending freedom of movement, what do you disagree with about her plans?
Well, first of all, today they're talk about perhaps extending the fishing limits. We want the 200-mile limit. They're still talking about 25 miles or something like that. Well, we don't want that. We want the full fishing limits for Scotland. That's a big business. We need that money, and we need that for employment. Now, they're flim-flamming about this because Fishing for Leave put a lot of stress on them. Finally, they've started talking about the 200-mile limit. But they cannot be trusted, and they need UKIP there to make sure that happens. And also, we need to get out of the single European market. The only way we can get our own trade deals is to be out of it. Then we can go around the world getting our deals with other countries without having to refer to 27 other countries. That will bring jobs to Scotland. And that is absolutely essential.
Thank you for that. So let's just bring in the co-convener of the Scottish Greens, Patrick Harvey. Do you think it's feasible that there could be a way Scotland could stay in the single market and still be part of the UK as it leaves the EU?
Well, various people have explored options for that. I think if the UK government had shown any willingness at all to even negotiate, to explore what those options might be and how they could be put into effect, we might be having a very different debate. But look, what's going to happen after this UK parliamentary election is a process by which UK Tory ministers want to take the power to rewrite huge swathes of the laws of these lands without proper parliamentary scrutiny. Many of them arguing for that bonfire of the regulations. You know, even some of the actions that our councils take, trying to look after the quality of our air. Some of the most polluted air in Europe is in Scottish cities. And those European laws, many of the Tories are arguing to abandon those. When we talk about access to the single market as well, you'll hear the Tories only saying access for big business, access for business to trade. The single market is so much more than that. It's all of our rights, our right of free movement. It's the legal protections, the social, environmental and workplace protections. And if you look at some of the free trade deals that all of these people are talking about around the world, so many of them have bedded into them the ability for big corporate interests to sue governments for having the nerve to try to protect their citizens. That is not an agenda that will benefit Scotland or the rest of these islands.
All right, thank you for that. Let's go back to our audience and see what they made of what this gentleman in the front row.
You've got to combine the thoughts about the free market with free movement. And I can't understand how we can cope with cutting out free movement. How is the NHS, how are the universities, the service industries, the farmers, how are they going to manage without free movement of EU people?
Ruth Davidson, the Conservatives have committed again in the manifesto to keeping immigration to the tens of thousands. How's that going to work for the economy, particularly the Scottish economy, which needs immigration?
Well, I think, first of all, to answer the question that the gentleman raised, the issue that we have in our health service predates by a long way the vote that we took last June. For example, the Royal College of Nursing said that between 2009 and 2012, the 20% cut to nursing training places, which happened while Nicola Sturgeon was Health Minister, the cut of doctors' places have really affected us and would go on to affect us for many years to come. Now, to be fair to the Scottish Government, they tried to recruit more GPs last year, 100 of them. They managed to get 37. We have over 800 vacancies. This isn't an EU problem. This is a problem that's been made in Scotland for Scotland. Now, we want to have people come in.
There's a specific policy here of reducing immigration below 100,000. Do you agree with that?
Net immigration, yes. So, for example, at the moment...
But you do agree with that? Well, you think there are too many people immigrating to the UK at the moment, and
I think you have to have an immigration system that is trusted, and I think that when you lose the trust of people, that's when you get social unrest. So we've got to have a system that's been right. Now, if you're talking about the difference between net immigration and immigration, for example, there are currently 438,000 overseas students in our universities, but because some come in first year and then they leave after their degree, that's not counted in the total. What I want to see is Scotland to be the most attractive place so we can attract the brightest and the best. At the moment, despite having a third of the landmass of the UK and 8.4% of the population, we only attract 4% of immigrants to this country to come here. Yes, it is. That's UK government figures.
Nicola Sturgeon.
That's absolutely true.
National Records for Scotland recently published the latest figures on inward migration to Scotland. Scotland has got 8% of the UK population. Last year, we had 7% of the total of overseas migrants coming to Scotland. Check the figures. The fact of the matter here is the proposal that the Tories have put forward in the manifesto, which I am astounded to hear Ruth Davidson support, would be devastating for the Scottish economy. Now, immigration is not an easy subject for politicians because people have concerns, but politicians have a duty to be honest about this. When we talk about migrants, you know, when it's people from this country going overseas, we talk about expats. But when we talk about migrants here, we are talking about people working in our hospitals, people serving us in our restaurants. We're talking about our friends and our neighbours. And the language around immigration, I think, is shocking. Now, we've got a need in this country to grow our population. If EU migration was to be ended, over the next 25 years, we would see, even constrained, we would see our working age population fall, while our pensioner age population is due to go up by 50%. That would be an economic catastrophe. I think it's disgraceful that we have a Tory party that plays to UKIP and in doing so puts the needs of our economy
said that we're a
on the line.
welcoming country.
And lastly,
to be a welcoming country.
Lastly,
I have always said that. I have always said that we need
and the last point,
at this point, you mentioned UKIP. This is the point to which nobody can hear you when you're talking over each other.
Strong allegation.
But you say things,
I have stood up in the Scottish Parliament. I have stood up at the Conservative Party
anybody for people all to be talking over each other.
And I have said that we've got to welcome
go to David Coburn on the immigration reduction.
Well, can I just say that we want a points-based system. That's the fairest way of bringing people in. And you can bring in people from the old Commonwealth as well. Now, that's a good idea, and we base it on the people we need for our economy. There's no reason we can't bring people in if we need them. But the difference of being in the European Union and not is that with the European Union, we cannot choose. It's open-door immigration, and we cannot control the numbers of people coming in, or who they are, or if they want to be terrorists.
Let Kezia Dugdale have her say.
We have the right to choose who comes into our country and make sure they're going to be good citizens and integrate to society.
You've made your point, David Coburn.
And if we can have in the country who we require...
David Coburn, you've made your point. Let Kezia Dugdale come in.
And we should welcome them, because there are 180,000 EU nationals living in Scotland today, and the first thing a Labour government would do is guarantee their right to stay.
Do you then, though, want...
May I say,
no,
we don't want
David
to get
Coburn,
rid of.
we've heard...
We just want...
We know your point. We've heard from you.
New people coming in.
David, Kezia, is it the Labour Party's policy to try to reduce immigration into the UK?
We don't have an immigration cap in our manifesto. We recognise the right of EU nationals to stay in this country because of the tremendous contribution they make to our economy. They work in our hospitals, they own businesses. Many have lived here for years, and the last thing we should do is treat them like bargaining chips, which is exactly what's happening here.
Willie Rennie.
Sarah, just up the road from where Ruth was brought up is one of the best universities in the world. Now, about a fifth of their staff come from outside the United Kingdom, from the European Union. About a fifth of the research income comes from the European Union, and crucially, students as well come from the European Union. What they are proposing with their extreme hard Brexit is undermining one of the best universities in the world. And I'm astonished about what Ruth Davidson has said. Last year, during the referendum on Europe, she called Boris Johnson a liar on 3 occasions. Now she's standing with him, arguing for an extreme hard Brexit. She's talking about the opportunities that it presents to this country. Now, if Boris was lying then, does that mean Ruth is lying now?
Very, very quickly, Ruth Davidson.
Willie used a specific example there, and I think that it's shameful that he's trying to scaremonger. EU nationals that are living here will not have their status changed. Research money in the manifesto. We've said that
a year to come to that. That's astonishing.
In the manifesto, research and development money is going up. Willie, I'm answering the charges that you put to me here. The research money is going up. Research and development money is going up. In terms of students, it's part of the net migration. I've already said there's 438,000 currently here. They don't go into that. So in terms of the example that you've used, you're wrong on 3 counts yourself.
You have waited.
We have absolutely...
We're going to have to move the debate on at this point. The other issue, which is, of course, dominating this campaign, is the question of whether or not there should be a second referendum on Scottish independence. Unsurprisingly, because the election is happening only a couple of months after the Scottish Parliament voted in favour of having another referendum. Nicola Sturgeon, is this election about whether or not we should have a second referendum? Is a vote for the SNP saying you do want another independence referendum?
This election is about whether Scotland's future is decided by the Scottish people in the Scottish Parliament or by Theresa May and a Westminster government. I think our future should always be in the hands of the Scottish people. Now, I think Scotland should have a choice at the end of the Brexit process, because the alternative to that is that we simply have to take it or leave it, or we don't get the chance to leave it. We have to like it or lump it, no matter how bad the deal turns out to be, even if Theresa May ends up walking away with no deal. So I believe we should have a choice. I think that is fair and it is democratic. But there is the other opportunity in this election as well, which is to give Scotland the opportunity to influence these Brexit negotiations. And that's why I say again, no matter how you voted last year, no matter how you voted in 2014, if you want Scotland to have the strongest possible voice in these negotiations, then vote SNP and strengthen Scotland's hand.
Now, I understand why. I understand you don't want to make this election a referendum on whether or not we should have another referendum, but a vote for the SNP is voting to say you want a second referendum, isn't it?
I don't think I'm making any secret about that. I've just set out the position. It was in the SNP's manifesto for the Holyrood election last year, and we won that election with the biggest share of the constituency vote that any party had ever got. The Scottish Parliament has endorsed that position. So this is about choice and democracy. But you know, the fact of the matter is here, when Ruth Davidson talks about independence in this campaign, she's using it as a smokescreen. You know, she says I talk about nothing else. The truth is she talks so much about independence that I can't get a word in edgeways to talk about it. I've got a Tory leaflet here. This has gone through everybody's door. It's a 4-page Tory leaflet, and it mentions an independence referendum 26 times. It doesn't mention the NHS once, it doesn't mention education once, it doesn't mention Tory welfare cuts once, it doesn't mention the removal of the pensions triple lock once. Ruth Davidson is using independence as a smokescreen in this campaign because she knows the Tory record and Tory policies are toxic.
Davidson. It is true that you are making independence absolutely central to your campaign. It's in block capital letters in front of every Tory leaflet I've seen.
And you know that... May I say something?
No, you may not.
No, you may not, because she's asking me a question.
Ruth's ally wants to help her out.
Yes, let me help her out.
No.
The question is for Ruth Davidson.
There's a really simple way. If people want me to stop fighting independence, there's a really simple way to make that happen, Nicola. Take your second referendum off the table. Do what you promised the people of Scotland that you would do and respect the result. I stood here with you on a platform just like this a year ago, and you looked down a camera and you looked at the audience and you promised people that if there was no change in support for independence, there wouldn't be another independence referendum.
Your party's proposing taking us out of the EU.
Everyone can remember you standing there before an election saying, oh, don't worry, it's safe to vote SNP. If there's no change in support for independence, there will be no referendum. As soon as you got past that thing, you came out and you're back at it again, because you only want one thing. This is the only thing you've ever wanted in your entire political career. And the country said no. The country said no, and you won't listen to them.
At this point, we need to go to the audience.
We can stop the SNP, and we need your help to do it. Vote for the Scottish Conservatives, and we can stop her having that second referendum.
We're going to listen to the audience now. There's a lady in the back row with her hand up.
I remember Ruth Davidson before the last independence referendum telling us that we would have to vote no to stay in the EU. Things change.
In the middle row here, there's a gentleman in a check shirt.
I think it's shameful that Scottish Labour and the Scottish Conservatives are using the independence question to hide behind their actual manifestos.
There's a chap in a green jacket at the end of this row. Yes, you, sir.
I'd just like to know from the First Minister how she'd like to fill in the budget deficit of 15 billion that's occurred since the drop of oil. It's unexplained. I'm not saying we should either have independence or not, but I'd like some abject fiscal honesty on the way that you're running this campaign.
That's probably a question for a different election, but let's take somebody else. There is a lady in the middle there, yes.
Isn't part of the reason why the Conservatives are talking so much, not talking about the NHS and education, is it not because that's a devolved issue and that's your responsibility, being in power in the Scottish Parliament? You should be looking after our hospitals, and you're not. You're banging on about independence all the time.
And let's take this lady in the front row here.
First Minister, well, I'd like to ask you both a question. Firstly, I'd like to say, Do you think your perceived obsession with independence might actually cost you your seat in this election? And secondly, I'd like to ask, the NHS, you say that you've ploughed millions into it. I'm a nurse who I can't manage on the salary I have. I have to go to food banks. I am struggling to pay bills. I want you to explain to me, if do you know one area that any of that money's gone? And can you tell me, because I can absolutely assure you, nurses are seeing none of it on the ground floor.
Now, we are going to get to discussing the health service later in the programme quite specifically. Well, David Coburn.
Nicola, she talks all the time about independence, but she's not. She's not in for independence. She wants rule by Europe, by European bureaucrats. She's not interested in rule by Holyrood or by Westminster. She wants to be ruled by Brussels. So whatever she's saying is absolute nonsense.
Patrick Harvey.
You began by asking what was the central issue in this election. And of the many people that I've been speaking to, I think at one level, people are feeling pretty scunnered with the number of votes that there have been in the last few years and the kind of false promises that have been made, whether it was vote no to stay in Europe or vote leave to get 350 million extra for the NHS. I think people are understandably feeling pretty cynical about all of that. But very many of them are raising the kind of issues that the UK government has been responsible for, whether that's cuts to the welfare and social security system, things like the family cap and the rape clause, whether it's the inequality in our society that's pushing up house prices. That's not something that we can solve just with a building programme. We do need to provide more housing, but there's so much more about the inequality in our economy that needs to be fixed and that the UK government is responsible for making worse. As well as that, we've got people struggling on poverty wages, and people both in and out of work are being exploited in this incredibly unequal society. There's a huge amount that we need to change that the UK government is responsible for, and I want to be putting forward positive ideas like a universal basic income that will actually make our society more equal in the first place.
Why then? Why then, Patrick Harvey, are you standing only 3 candidates in Scotland in this election if you feel so passionately about what needs to be changed? Is it because you don't want to split the pro-independence vote in some constituencies, or could you not find enough people to stand?
I do regret the fact that we don't have more candidates in this election. We were profoundly committed to our hard work gaining councillors in places around Scotland, and we got more councillors elected than ever before. And right in the middle of a local election campaign, when other parties were trying to turn that into a proxy for the independence debate, local democracy really matters. We were committed to that. Right in the middle of the campaign, Theresa May, in a sign of contempt for democracy, decided to call a snap election. A party like ours cannot knock on the door of millionaires and billionaires. What we can do is knock on the doors of our target seats, and we're working very, very hard in those. And I think we have the best chance that we've ever had of putting a Green voice into Westminster to represent Scotland.
Kezia Dugdale. The Labour Party's UK manifesto is very clear that you would try and block a second referendum on Scottish independence, but the Scottish Parliament has voted in favour of it. How can you democratically justify not allowing it to happen?
Well, the Labour Party manifesto that will publish in Scotland tomorrow is also very clearly against independence and an independence referendum because of the £15 billion worth of additional cuts that would come with that. If you think life under the Tories is bad, imagine what you'll get with independence with £15 billion worth of additional cuts yet to come. I can't ask people to vote to be poorer. My job is to stand up for working people, to invest in the economy, and that's why the Labour Party will always say no to independence in the second independence referendum.
Always say no. Under any circumstances, if a majority SNP government and the Scottish Parliament were to vote again in favour of a referendum, you would still say no?
When it means £15 billion worth of cuts, that's the difference between what we raise in taxes and what we spend in our public services. I cannot ask people in Scotland to be poorer. I won't stand for it. I will always vote against the second independence referendum.
Rather than an argument for saying they shouldn't be given the choice.
People answered the question in 2014. We spent 2.5 years debating it, and we said no. People want to move on from that.
And you said... And you said just after the 2016 referendum that Scotland voted for both unions, and that's
I'll have
what you
to
want.
stop you there,
It's the
Patrick
UK
Harvey.
Parliament not allowing that.
Sarah, it took 44 days for Nicola Sturgeon to publish her bill on another independence referendum. It took 15 months for them to write their mental health strategy, which was way out of date. It took 2 years for us to persuade them to expand nursery education for 2-year-olds. And it took 6 years for us to persuade them about a pupil premium. For the SNP, it's always, always about independence. Today is Brexit as the excuse. Every other day, it could be any excuse at all. We need to cancel this second divisive independence referendum because it's dividing our country and it's setting us back.
First question that we have is from Louise Perry.
Where does the fault lie for recent failings of numeracy in schools?
First Minister.
Well, the responsibility for Scottish education is mine and the Scottish Government's. I make no bones about that. There is much to be very positive about in Scottish education. We have a new curriculum in place which has been praised by the OECD. We see record numbers of young people coming out of school with higher passes and advanced higher passes. We see record numbers of young people going into university. But we have made very clear we want to raise standards in our schools even further, and we want to close the attainment gap. That's why we have a new national improvement framework. It is why we have a new attainment fund, so £120 million now going directly into the hands of head teachers to give head teachers the ability to do things that they think can help raise standards and close the attainment gap. And interestingly, we're not doing, as the Tories are planning, south of the border, investing in schools by taking away free school meals. We're going to protect free school meals for primary 1 to 3 pupils because that helps learning. We're also extending childcare because all of the evidence says that it is better quality early years education that helps to improve attainment in schools. So we're absolutely focused on making sure that we improve education and get the challenges we've got in education addressed, and that's why I have said repeatedly that for me as First Minister it is my top priority.
You've had 10 years.
And
you've been in charge for 10 years.
Which is why I'm proud of the fact that we've got
£1.5 billion worth of cuts, 4,000 fewer teachers, 1,000 fewer support staff, and a widening gap between the richest and the poorest kids. That's your record. That's 10 years of the SNP.
Firstly, Kezia, the gap between the richest and the poorest is not widening. The gap between the richest and poorest is narrowing, and we're determined to narrow it.
Name one source that proves that.
That's why we are investing more in education.
But you say you can't provide the source because you know you've just told a porky there. That gap is just as stubborn as ever.
Look at
Who says it's closing?
University access. You see the gap between the richest and poorest.
We're talking about schools.
In schools, you see the National 5 qualifications. Kezia, it is National 5 qualifications. There is a narrowing of the gap. But we want to go even further. But you say we've been in charge for 10 years. That's why I'm proud of the fact we've got record exam passes in our schools. I'm proud of the fact we've extended early years education and are going even further. And I'm proud of the fact that we have protected free education for university students, because if it had been up to you, people would have been having to pay to go to university.
It's a scandal, Nicola. It's all because you're obsessed with independence.
Hold on a moment. Let's go back to Louise, who asked the question. You asked whose fault it is for the failings in literacy and numeracy in schools. Whose fault do you think it is?
Well, the question wasn't answered, firstly.
We'll go around everybody else before we finish on this.
Where do you start? The curriculum for excellence has been panned by teachers. I'm a teacher myself. I teach maths. You talk about record higher and advanced higher passes. Well, that is going to happen if you lower the standard of exams. The standard of exams going out is absolutely disgraceful. This National 5 does not look like what standard grade credit did. I'm only speaking about maths because that's my area. So if you're going to lower the standard of exam, then you would see passes presumably rising.
Okay, well let's take that point and go to Ruth Davidson.
Well, I think firstly, thank you very much for the question. I think it's absolutely astonishing to sit here and listen to a First Minister of Scotland that wants applause for finally getting round to cleaning up a mess that her party's been in charge of creating for the last 10 years. There's lots of things that we need to do differently in our schools. First of all, there was some really good intentions behind Curriculum for Excellence, but we have to be honest enough to say that it's not working. That's why we want to have a full review, and we're working with educational experts to do it. The guidance for teachers runs to 20,000 pages. That's not good enough. Teachers haven't got a fighting chance of being able to teach this. We've got a problem in that every time we fall down an international ranking, the Scottish Government's solution to that is to pull us out of doing the tests so we don't know how we're doing against other countries. We've also got the issue where we don't have independent inspectors for our schools, and we don't have enough, and they were so busy trying to help out because Curriculum for Excellence was so hard to introduce, they didn't do any inspections at all for several years. That's not good enough for raising standards. We need to empower our teachers, we need to hire more because we've got 4,000 fewer than when Nicola Sturgeon came to power, particularly in maths and the STEM subjects. We're seeing that a quarter of maths training places aren't filled. I've repeatedly asked the First Minister to look at innovative new ways to get teaching staff into Scotland, including some charities like Teach First and others. I'm not wedded to that, but there's lots more we can do on top of that. And the idea that Nicola Sturgeon is sitting here and saying, it's all right, guys, I've got this, after it fell apart on her watch, is an absolute disgrace.
Willie Rennie.
Nicola's right when she talks about investing in the early years is the best investment we can make in a child's future. She's right when she says that we should have an attainment fund that will invest in closing that inequality gap that's really stubborn, as Kez was talking about. She's right about all those things. But why has it taken so long? She's been in power for 10 years. We've been asking her to do these things for an awful long time, many, many years, and she denied it at first. Then she accepted it. And the reality is, and I have to say this, that she's so distracted by her obsession with independence that she is now letting our education system down.
I will go back to the audience, but I should let the First Minister come in on that.
Well, you know, the fact of the matter is there are challenges in Scottish education, but there are also real things to be proud of in Scottish education.
You've listed the achievements. The question was, where does the fault lie for recent failings? And there are failings. That's on you.
I started my answer by saying the responsibility for Scottish education is mine and my government. So, you know, I've not made any bones about that. There are teacher recruitment challenges, not just in Scotland, but in many different countries. So we are looking at getting innovative, different ways to get people into the teaching profession. We're investing more directly to head teachers. Incidentally, I think all of these parties, with the exception of the Greens, voted against the budget that put that extra money into the hands of teachers. We're not cutting money to schools, we're increasing money to schools by £120 million. So we're taking the action that is empowering our teachers to take the initiatives that will improve not just literacy and numeracy, but the standards across education. So we are not shying away from these challenges, we're addressing these challenges, and we're going to continue to do so. And what we find is that some of the things that we bring forward that are new and innovative and sometimes controversial and challenging, we find that Willie Rennie opposes them. So we brought in a new national improvement framework, and Willie Rennie has opposed it every step of the way. So we'll continue to make sure we do the right things by parents and students right across the country.
Okay, no, let's take some contributions from our audience, then we'll get to the other panellists. There's a gentleman in the front row.
Yes, I'm a teacher too. Good news for the SNP and bad news. I've been teaching now, this is my 5th decade, and the problems that we have started 5 decades ago. We embrace every progressive advance thrown into schools, and what we've reached now, what we're actually talking about, is where 1/5 of our primary schools leave primary without basic literacy and numeracy skills, which isn't good. The other thing is you've put £120 million into bridging the gap and so on, but they're not allowed to spend it on staff. I know primary school head teachers, I've heard of them, who can't employ permanent staff, and what are they doing with the money? They've got loads of it, you're right. They're buying furniture because they've got to spend it. And education is needing completely revamped. We need to look at get back to making sure that our children leave primary school with basic skills. Not necessarily. The primary teachers have to teach just about everything, and it's impossible for them to do the kind of job they need to do, so they could pass the children on to the secondary sector, where then value will be added.
Thank you very much for your contribution. There's a young man towards the back with his hand in the air. Young man in a black shirt, yes.
I think one of the things that the SNP has to be commended for has been the introduction of free tuition fees for Scottish students. It really has added and made it so much easier for a Scottish student who can't afford to normally go to university to be able to have the opportunity to go and study at some of the best universities in the world.
Oh, and in our audience on the floor, the gentleman in the blue shirt.
I'd just like to make the point, yeah, free tuition fees I feel are good ideologically, but in a world of budget restraints, surely it'd be better socially to actually provide students with the finance so they can actually live at university, be able to actually afford their rent. At the moment, many of my friends at university have to rely out of necessity on a part-time job, as well as all their bank of mum and dad just to pay their fees, as well as, not fees, their actual accommodation costs. Surely it'd be better to invest in maintenance grants, increase student finance so they can actually live at university and be able to afford to, rather than at the moment they'll pay in the
Patrick
future.
Harvey, can you pick up on that?
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly issues which I think we need to focus on, the things the UK government should be doing to improve the pay that people get. Many of those students will be working in very exploitative forms of work, as well as to reduce the housing costs and the living costs that people have. But look, the question about education in Scotland, about school education in Scotland, where we started, there is clearly a mixed picture, and I think the SNP sometimes are too ready to focus on changing governance structures or standardised testing or these kind of things, rather than the long-term resources that schools need. That's why the Greens were so focused on getting them to reverse £160 million of cuts to local councils which run our schools in Scotland. But look, this is not a test of the Scottish Parliament. You're not about to elect MSPs to the Scottish Parliament. You're about to elect MPs to Westminster. And if young people in schools are turning up hungry and spending their day hungry, they're not going to be able to get the best out of their education. And the UK government is pushing thousands more families deeper into poverty. It is transferring wealth that we all generate in our economy from the poorest third of our society to the richest third in our society. So whatever the other actions that Scotland can take to mitigate that harm, it's not going to be enough unless we change direction of UK policy and ensure that we're investing for the long term and closing the inequality gap in our society that at the moment is limiting the ability of children and young people to get the best out of the education that's provided.
Thank you, Patrick Harvey. Now, Patrick Harvey's absolutely right, of course. Education is a devolved issue that's controlled from Holyrood, but we had a lot of interest from our audience, and of course a lot of people care very much about this, so it will probably influence how they vote. We were being asked about free tuition fees from a student. David Coburn, what's UKIP's policy on
UKIP's policy is to extend free tuition to England as well, and we think they should have the same privilege. I think it's quite right. But what worries me is that the Scottish taxpayer are paying a lot of money for EU students to be educated at Scottish universities, which is depriving Scottish students of places at those universities. I think that's wrong. I also think that it's a disgrace that children, this gentleman is absolutely right, children should be coming out of school illiterate, are not functioning properly. That is absolutely wrong. When I was at school in Scotland, it was the finest education system in the world, and we were also parsing Latin and Greek at the age of 12. Well, if they could do that then, why can't they do it now? It may not be necessary now, but it would be good if they were able to.
It's about
so
as relevant
what
as
is wrong? What is wrong, Patrick, is that you've got people coming out of school who are not properly educated. That's absolutely wrong. And that's down to this lady here, who has made an absolute disaster and mincemeat of the Scottish education system.
All right, well, we shall leave that there for a moment to move on to another question, where David Morrison has a question for the panel.
Should we increase income tax to meet all social costs?
Willie Rennie.
Yes, sir. I think we should put a modest penny on income tax to have a colossal effect on public services.
On the basic rate of income tax?
On the basic rate of income tax. That would deliver about £500 million for Scottish society, for Scottish public services. We in particular want to invest it in education, our last subject, particularly in nursery, schools and colleges, to have that transformational effect, because Scottish education, as we knew, used to be one of the best in the world, and it's now been judged as just average, and that's not good, because it drives our economy, a good education system, to provide the skills for our workforce, but also for our companies to create that economic wealth. It's that virtuous circle. So yes, I would, but I'd also make sure we invest in mental health services, because mental health services need that big step change. You know that children in this very city can wait up to 2 years for important mental health treatment. I think that's a disgrace. They should be getting the support now, and that's why we need to invest in mental health services too. So yes, absolutely, put a modest penny on income tax to have that colossal effect on public services.
Should we increase income tax to meet social costs?
Yes, I think we should. And we should remember that the Scottish Parliament now has the powers over income tax. That matters because we're now in a position to choose here in Scotland to do things differently from the Tories. What the SNP have done is take the Tory cuts and pass them on. It doesn't have to be this way. So yes, I think we should use the income tax powers that we have. And I in particular would ask those...
This is a general election. Tell us what you would do with UK-wide tax rates.
Sure, well, but they are devolved to the Scottish Parliament. So when you see Labour's manifesto tomorrow, you'll see us committed to the same tax policies we had last year. That's 1 penny on the basic rate, as Willie Rennie has described, and a 50p top rate of tax, asking those people who earn over £150,000 a year to pay a bit more tax to invest in the education system. We heard from teachers earlier. The reality is, I meet teachers every single day who are having to bring their own resources into classrooms. We've got school budgets creaking at the seams and vacancies go unfulfilled. If we are serious about closing that gap and investing in our young people so they can be everything they want to be, we have to return to having the best possible education system in the world. We can't do that on the cheap, which is why I think we have to ask the richest people in society to pay their fair share.
Nicola Sturgeon, Kezia Dugdale mentioned a 50p top rate of tax there. It's your policy that you believe that you would vote for that in Westminster for the rest of the UK, but when you had the opportunity to introduce it in Scotland, you didn't.
There's a very simple reason for that, because we were given advice that if you just did that in Scotland without the Scottish Parliament having the power to tackle tax avoidance, to set the rules that stop people transferring income into capital gains, then we would potentially lose money from that, and nobody would set a tax rate if you knew you were going to lose money. That problem doesn't arise at the moment across the UK, so we do support the restoration of the 50p top tax rate. Incidentally, all these years Labour were in power, they had the chance to have a 50p top rate of tax, and they didn't do it until the last few months of they were doing it. But on tax more generally, I don't think we should raise the basic rate of income tax, because one of the big issues over the next few years, I think, is the squeeze on living standards. We saw inflation rise to 2.7% the other day. We have experts saying that we're going to have inequality rising at the fastest rate since the days of Margaret Thatcher, that the incomes of the lowest third in society are going to fall by 10% because of the policies of the Tory government. I don't think we should be asking low and middle income earners to pay more. But I also don't think we should be handing a massive tax cut to higher rate taxpayers, to the top 10% of income earners. The Scottish Government hasn't done that, but the Tories, while they're freezing the value of tax credits, working tax credits and child tax credits, are still going to hand a massive tax cut to the richest people in society. I think those are the wrong priorities, and if you want MPs to stand up for the right priorities for Scotland, then vote SNP to make sure you get them.